Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, the co-host. Chris, welcome to our program.
Good morning, sir. Great to be with you.
Very good. You know, the big news right now is the breakthrough. Our president will be talking to Jong-un, and maybe some good will come of it. At least we're keeping our fingers crossed and claiming this is a little bit of good news, and it's as sure as a shocker. Sometimes I think the president likes to shock people, and he doesn't follow a consistent pattern in a philosophy, but consistently he likes to shock people, so somebody should have predicted he would do exactly this, because he has sort of surprised a lot of people, but he has really stirred up his enemies. You know, some people won't give him an inch, no matter what he does. It's hate him regardless, and I thought it was interesting that some of those neocons was apoplectic. They were so angry and upset because what are they going to do? And it's almost like, well, we hope it fails, and it could lead to war, and we do need a war because it would be worth it. That's Lindsey Graham's argument. So I'm one to be on the optimistic side of this and say some good can come of it. There's history to back that up, even dealing with more ruthless communists than Jong-un is. So let's hope for the best on this.
Yes, I agree, Dr. Paul, and we're not bashful. We criticize President Trump often on this show when he aggresses against life, liberty, and property, which is all too often. But this is a move towards peace, so he deserves praise because peace is the foundation of life, liberty, and property. We don't know what's going to happen. He could make things worse, or the people around him could make things worse. But as you've said, since as long as I can remember, it's etched in my brain, why don't you just talk to people first instead of bombing them or starving them with sanctions? And that's happening, and that deserves some praise.
Right, and I think the big issue here is if they come to some type of agreement that seems to be opening up the doors toward peace, it will be the trust factor. You know, can we trust Jong-un? Or the other question is, can we trust the United States? Not in particular on this issue, just Trump, because the United States doesn't have a perfect record on agreements. Sometimes we have reneged and we have done some harm. So I would say that the trust factor is the unknown, and it's probably the most challenging as well, because I don't think there's much of a challenge on the military power. I mean, no matter what Jong-un claims, and I think he's in better shape than he's been in when he negotiated with the previous presidents, because he really didn't have as much military clout as he has now. I sort of think that he's not quite as strong as he's painted to be, but nevertheless, I think you have to consider it a dangerous situation. So I think he's coming from a different angle. I found it interesting, though, that he seems to be going out of his way to be agreeable. I want to talk. I'm not going to test any more missiles at the moment. And even said to Trump, you don't have to stop these exercises, military exercises with the South Koreans. Now, I don't know what more you can offer. The big thing, if this is sincere, they should not ignore it. They should try to move along. We've done it before, and has had some benefits come from it by talking to people that have strong disagreements with us.
Yes, and as the news came out, I was watching Twitter last night, and it was very predictable. The neoconservatives, the warmongers, you know, they do not like the fact that he's going to talk with Jong-un. They always want war. It's amazing, and these people are in power, unfortunately. But what bothers me more, I think, than the people that always want war are the people on the left that just hate Trump because he's Trump and no matter what he does. I mean, we're talking about millions of lives here that could be dead if there's a war. I mean, that has to be considered. It doesn't mean that you like Trump, but don't come down on the against peace when there's so many lives involved.
You know, I keep thinking about this on again, off again. If you look at all this history going back to 1950, and a war that was started, and technically we're still at war. There's never been a peace treaty. And I was postulating a few minutes ago, what if we didn't, what if we had a non-interventionist foreign policy? Think how bored some of these people would be that like to pump up the military-industrial complex and spend all this money and have conflict and stir things up. It wouldn't exist because we wouldn't have gotten into the war. We wouldn't have listened to the United Nations. We might have had a debate in the U.S. Congress and not gone to war. And all that expenditure and all this fighting, and my prediction would be that Korea would be unified, more like Vietnam has been unified once we left that country.
Yeah, one point I wanted to make, Dr. Paul, is President Trump could have said no, which, it was in his power to do so. He didn't have to agree to this meeting, and many of the neocons think he should have said no. Because North Korea already, they're saying they're going to break any deal that they make. And how ironic. I mean, if you think about, as you mentioned earlier, the deals that we've broken with Russia, moving NATO towards their borders, and now, even right now, with President Trump and Iran looking to get out of the Iran deal just because he doesn't like the spirit of it. So, just the fact that he said yes to this meeting, I think is a positive.
And the one big one that we reneged on was in 1994 because there was work there with Clinton, like I said, had a pretty good agreement going on, and we were the ones that broke it. And there were several things that we agreed to, and the agreement was in '94. And I think by 1998, the congressional investigators reported to the Congress that things were going very well, and IAEA responded that the North Koreans were living up to their promises. But what we had promised them to do, that we were going to give them light water reactors to replace their loss of energy to support their enemy. And actually, we promised them 500,000 tons of fuel to tide them over, and we promised to remove sanctions. But into the end of that decade, and as soon as the Bush administration came in, they cracked down. The whole thing fell apart in 2002. But it was clearly that we reneged on the promises that we made, and you'd think that they've been stung with this, so maybe they would be hesitant to get too involved with us once again. But it to me sounds like it should be in their interest to get involved with us.
To close for me, Dr. Paul, I'll give my one wish, and I hope that it ultimately, and who knows if it's a long shot or not, leads to bringing the troops home from Korea, because we know that bothers Jong-un. It's probably his main motivation for seeking nuclear weapons or having nuclear weapons, whatever the deal is. But not only having troops there, but having these military exercises on his border. So if the troops can come home, that would be huge. But it's a big deal because those troops are there also to encircle China. So, which we have no business doing that either. So hopefully someday, if those troops come home, we'll know that maybe change is in the air.
There's one argument has been made and will be made, and I'm sure the president will make it, is they're responding to our tough policy. We put on the sanctions, and we are tough, and we've told them that we're going to spend more money on the military, and it's a military intimidation. I would like to think that that is not the most successful way to have, negotiations with another country. That was said when the Soviet system came down, and this was a consequence of Reagan dealing with Gorbachev in '87. And whoever believed that an agreement on weaponry in '87 would lead 2 years later to the downfall of the Berlin Wall. But the argument still goes on. The only reasons the Soviets caved in was because they went bankrupt. This is what they argued. We built up, and they had to build up, and they went bankrupt. That wasn't it. the communist system was bankrupt. It didn't work, and that's why it didn't happen. So they had an economic need to do something with the United States, and I think they came to that agreement, and the Soviet system, fell apart. But we dealt with Mao Zedong, with Nixon, and that opened up the doors there. I was pretty much thinking about what was going on when Kennedy was talking about the missiles in Cuba. At that time, nobody knew that we agreed to take weapons away from out of Turkey, and we also, agreed to not ever invade Cuba, which is amazing. That was part of the agreement, and we haven't. We have maintained that, but. I think that many times we've made these agreements and we've lived up to them. And in World War II, just think we were dealing with probably one of the most ruthless dictators ever, Stalin. And it's in our interest to do that. So there's a lot of looking past that. But I really think that the risk here is minimal. And it's moving in the right direction, should be encouraged. The people who hate Trump, when they take this position and then they just want to destroy it and make sure he's not successful, there's partisanship on there, but that's the neocons too opinion, because they can't perpetuate the conflict if there's success in moving in this direction. So I think we should all be very pleased with what's happening. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next 2 months. But I do believe that with what the North Koreans have given so far, that we have to do something. We can't just say sanctions forever, military exercises on their borders forever. That wouldn't be much of an overture. So I think it's very sincere, and just maybe, just like the Soviet system was coming apart, not because of us having a strong military, but for economic reasons. It may be that a trip with many dignitaries from North Korea to South Korea, that opens up the door. They see how people with a relative amount of freedom live, and maybe there's more and more people in North Korea that would like to change their standard of living. There may be that motion. Maybe it's time for a Korean perestroika and a glasnost. Open it up, let's talk about it, and move in that direction. So let's hope that will be the consequence. If that is the case, I'll be happy about it. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.